Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud for another delightful Dhamma study session together. So, as I've been doing the past few sutta study sessions, I'll be going through a few selected verses from the Dhammapada, and I put the link to the text on Sutta Central for those who are interested in seeing the translation for themselves. So I'll start with paying homage to the Buddhas. So please join your hands in Anjali and bring up a mind of veneration for the Buddhas. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, as mentioned, I'll be continuing with the Dhammapada. So picking out a few verses that I particularly like, ones that I find either personally interesting or moving, or which have notable Dhamma content, which I'd like to explain in more detail. And in the past, I've usually just been picking 2 verses, but today I chose 4 to go through 4 because each one of these is relatively concise and straightforward, so it shouldn't require much explanation. So this is from the chapter on fools, Bala Vagga. For those who have not read much of the suttas, it can sometimes be a little surprising just how politically incorrect and blunt the Buddha could be at times. So if somebody was a fool, he would just be like, "You're a fool." And if people did stupid things, he would just be like, "Well, that's something stupid to do. Like, that's foolish, that's unwise." So the Buddha was quite willing to just directly call out people's foolishness. So it's good to keep that in mind, that this is coming not from a place of hostility or malice, but it's coming from a place of deep compassion. So when you read the Buddha saying something like, "Oh, you foolish, empty-headed man," it's good to hear that not as an attack, but as a kind, gentle attempt to help someone. Not particularly gentle in our way of thinking, perhaps, but from the perspective of the Buddha, he's seeing people who are deeply immersed in suffering, deeply immersed in dukkha, and he's doing everything he can to try to help them get free of that. And sometimes that means calling someone a fool. Sometimes that's the quickest way to snap somebody out of their self-obsessed cycle of torment. So I'll go ahead and start reading through these verses and talking about them. So I'll read through the English translation here, and then I'll talk a bit about the Pali as relevant. So the first one, Dhammapada Verse 60, the translation here says, "Long is the night for one who is awake. Long is a yojana for one who is weary. Long is samsara for fools who do not understand the true Dhamma." So this particular verse doesn't actually have any particularly deep content that needs explanation. I just find it really beautiful. And so long is the night for one who's awake. So anyone who's ever had insomnia problems can relate to this. When you're lying in bed and you just can't seem to sleep, and the night just drags on and on and on and on. And especially if you're prone to anxious thought patterns, you can be lying in bed just rolling through these same anxious thoughts over and over again, waiting for sleep that never seems to come. So the relief of unconsciousness that never comes. The next line, long as a yojana for one who is weary. So yojana, it's a technical term referring to a certain distance. And I left this untranslated because there's no English word which quite matches a yojana. So often you'll see yojana translated as league or mile, but those aren't correct. So the exact length of a yojana is unclear, but estimates based upon the ancient texts. So with the Buddhist texts and Hindu texts, because the word yojana is also used in Hindu documents, puts it as somewhere between 8 kilometers and 15 kilometers. So the exact length of a yojana is unclear. It's probably somewhere in that range of 8 to 15 kilometers. Point being is that, so a yojana was approximately the distance between 2 villages. And you can still see this in old countries, so not in the United States where everything's really far apart. But you can see this in old countries where commonly the distance between 2 villages was about what someone could comfortably walk in the course of 3 to 4 hours, which is about 1 yojana. So 1 yojana was like a relatively standard day's journey between 2 villages. So yeah, 12 kilometers or so, what you could walk. But if you're really exhausted, then walking from one village to the other seems interminably long. If you're exhausted, then walking even for 20 minutes can seem like way too much, let alone walking for 3 or 4 hours. And so these first two ones are giving the sense of someone who is suffering through something interminably long and painful, which then brings us to the metaphor he's trying to introduce here. So he says, long is samsara for fools who do not understand the true Dhamma. So similarly, samsara is this constant cycle of birth and death and rebirth that we've been going through over and over again. And for those who do not understand the true Dhamma, so for the who the Buddha here calls fools, samsara just keeps dragging on and on and on, just like that journey which never seems to end, or that long night of insomnia where you're just laying awake, waiting and waiting and waiting for sleep that never comes. So the point of this verse is to give us a sense of urgency, a sense of the importance of practicing Buddhism sincerely so that we can start to shorten our samsara and break free of this long night. Then the next verse, verse 61. So these 4 verses have no relation to each other except that they all reference fools. So the second verse, verse 61, this one says, if you do not find a traveler who is superior or equal to yourself, then resolutely travel alone. One cannot go with a fool. This one also I find delicious. This is referring especially for monastics. So it's a very common practice in monastic Buddhism. Less so these days, but in the time of the Buddha it was very common. These days it's still done from time to time. It's the practice of usually 2 or more monks will travel together from place to place. So looking for good places to meditate, or looking for senior teachers to learn from, or walking around giving Dhamma talks in different places. And it's actually interesting because I recently, in planning for doing this practice next year, I was asking for advice from a few senior monks who have a lot of experience with this kind of Dhamma wandering. And one of the monks I asked, the very first piece of advice he gave was, be very careful when choosing your companions. And he said that I asked him several questions, but he actually ignored all my questions and just started by saying this, like, be very careful who you choose as your companions. Then he went on to answer my questions. But I found it really notable that this was what he emphasized the most, just like the Buddha. The most important thing is not what kind of tent you have or what kind of shoes you wear. The most important thing is who you're traveling with, because that has a tremendous effect on your mind, has a tremendous effect on your practice, has a tremendous effect upon the overall experience and whether the experience is beneficial or harmful, whether it's wholesome or unwholesome. So here, the Buddha says, if you can't find someone who's superior or equal to yourself, then resolutely travel alone. And this also is reminiscent of the well-known Kagavasana suttas, the commonly translated the rhinoceros horn suttas, where the Buddha makes a similar series of statements. If you can't find a suitable traveling companion, then it's better to be alone. It's better to be alone than to be with fools. So that's also the message here. Optimally, you want to travel with someone who's better than yourself, because then they will inspire you to improve your own conduct. But you should at least try to find someone who's equal to you, somebody who's not going to drag you down, someone who at least is going to help keep you, at a bare minimum, they're going to help keep you from backsliding. But optimally, they're going to help you improve. And also you towards them. So also superior to yourself, you might be traveling with someone who is superior to you in certain qualities, and perhaps you are superior to them in other qualities. So then you can both inspire each other and uplift each other. What the Buddha does very clearly say is, he says, one cannot go with a fool. So nati bale sahayata. This could also be translated, there is no companionship with fools. But the word sahaya literally means going together, someone you go together with. So he's saying you should not go with a fool. You should not be together with a fool. Then verse 62, this one, the translation says, a fool is tormented by thoughts of children and wealth. But since one does not even possess oneself, how could one possess children and wealth? This also I find really beautiful. So first off, this line, a fool is tormented by thoughts of children and wealth. How many times have we seen that in our lives? People who are just constantly in some state of anxiety or worry or depression or fear because of their children, because of what their children might do or might not do, or what's going on with their kids' lives. And of course, tormented by thoughts of wealth. People who are terrified that they might get the short end of the stick in the divorce proceedings. Or people who are upset because they're not making as much money as they think they should. Or worried that they've got a lot of expenses that they need to pay for. They're constantly tormented by the fear of losing wealth or fear of not getting enough wealth. But the Buddha says you don't even possess yourself. So whatever you think you are, whatever you think yourself is, you don't even possess that. So if you don't even possess yourself, how could you possibly possess children and wealth? Like, these things don't belong to us. Not even this body belongs to us. Not even these thoughts and emotions belong to us. So how on earth could somebody else belong to you? How on earth could any physical property belong to you? And then finally, the fourth verse. So this is a very commonly quoted one. This fourth verse I'm about to read, verse 63. This is very commonly quoted, so you might recognize this one immediately. This one says, a fool who conceives of foolishness is wise in that regard. But a fool who has the conceit of wisdom can truly be called a fool. So these verses, they revolve around the verb manyati and the noun form of that word, which is mani. So more commonly, you might be familiar with the word mana. So mana is usually translated as conceit, but the word mana more literally means concept. So manyati means to conceptualize something, to form a concept about something. So it's related to conceit in the sense that a conceit is a concept of self, a concept of who we are or what we are. So here, you might have seen this translated something like a fool who thinks themselves a fool. So that is one way of taking this word manyati. So manyati, like forming a self-concept about something. So a fool who forms a self-concept of foolishness. But the literal meaning of the Pali is just a fool who conceives of foolishness, a fool who has the concept of foolishness. So not even recognizing necessarily their own foolishness, but at least having some awareness that there is such a thing. That can be the beginning of wisdom. It can be, it's like as we recognize, okay, there actually is such a thing as foolishness, and we have some idea of what defines a fool, then at some point, there's a chance that we're going to look at ourselves and examine ourselves and realize, oh, that's me. It's not just other people who are foolish, it's also me. I also do foolish things from time to time. So this is wisdom. So a fool who recognizes the existence of foolishness, that's already wisdom. And if you can go a step farther and start to see your own foolishness, then that's even greater wisdom. But then the Buddha says, a fool who has the conceit of wisdom. So in other words, a fool who falsely believes that they're wise. A fool who has this self-concept, this self-belief, this belief that they're a wise person. That's the kind of person that can truly be considered foolish. And one of the reasons for this is because a fool who believes they're wise will not make any effort to correct their foolishness. They'll just stay caught in their foolish ways of thinking and acting. So the first step is always recognizing that there is more work to be done on ourselves. And the next thing is recognizing that we may need to let go of even our most deeply cherished opinions. We may need to change even our most deeply held viewpoints and beliefs. And we also might need to change even the behavior patterns and thought patterns that we identify as ourselves. In fact, we almost certainly are going to need to change those things. So that's it for the Dhammapada verses that I wanted to bring up this morning. So maybe we can conclude the sutta reading with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And at this time, I'll take any questions or comments that you might have. So hello to everyone who's joining in. So hello to Michael, Jayanta, Mike, Gita, Liz, Hui, Sud, Yankee, Egad, Nicole, Karinde, Rendi, Sangtong, and Amaranta. Welcome. Good to see all of you. And I don't see any questions online yet. Do we have any questions from the residents? Yeah, no? Okay. Yeah, again, these aren't particularly profound Dhamma verses in the sense of having some deep meaning to them that needs to be carefully sussed out. But rather, these verses are actually quite direct. The Buddha is giving very direct advice. So saying here, again, saying very directly that, first off, one should not go together with fools. I actually find this really notable. So sometimes people say things like, well, out of compassion, we should be around people who are foolish because then we might be able to help them. And the Buddha's like, well, let's think about this more carefully. You might think that you're helping that person, but 1, how much are you actually helping them? And 2, how much harm is coming to you as a result of spending your time with fools? I've actually spent a lot of time with people who were really not particularly interested in learning genuine Buddhism. And I reflect back on it, and it's like, how much benefit actually came from that time? How much benefit came to those people? They weren't really interested in Dhamma. So how much benefit actually came from spending time with them? Not much for them, not much for me. Was it really worth it? Is it better to spend our time in wiser ways? Um, and again, I was particularly struck by this verse. A fool is tormented by thoughts of children and wealth, but since one does not even possess oneself, how could one possess children and wealth? Again, this very direct statement of like, what is it that you think actually belongs to you? Why do we get so tormented about things which don't belong to us and can't even we have no control over? Okay, so I see some questions appearing. So Amaranta asks, is foolishness related to ignorance? Yes. So the Pali word usually translated as ignorance is avidya. And that avidya particularly means ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, ignorance of the three characteristics. So it's not understanding the nature of reality, not understanding how we generate our own dukkha, not understanding the impermanence, the unsatisfactoriness and impersonal nature of all things. So because of that ignorance, then we make foolish choices. We make choices that generate more dukkha. Because we don't understand how we generate our own dukkha, then we just keep generating more. So that's the behavior of a fool. The behavior of a fool is to keep torturing themselves through performing physical, verbal, and mental actions that generate dukkha. So yeah, foolishness is definitely related to ignorance. Foolishness is the behavior and conduct which is informed by ignorance. Michael asks, could you maybe tell us more about your wandering plan? This would be a great question for monk chat tomorrow evening. So that would be the optimal time to ask about this. Then Sud says, how does one give up conceit for more wealth? I see this all this time. There's like this drive to make the most money. Though intellectually one understands it's tough to give it up. Any thoughts as to how to let go? Well, first off, recognize what's beneath it. Why do you want money? Seriously, why do you want money? Probably because you think it will make you happy. So what do you actually want? You want happiness. You think you want money, but actually you want happiness. So the better question is to ask, how can I learn how to be happy all the time, regardless of how much money I have or don't have? I don't have any money at all, for the record. Zero. It's been that way for many, many years now. That's part of what it means to be a monk in the tradition that I practice. It's great. Yeah, money is not happiness. If it was, I would be depressed, but I'm not. In fact, I'm happier than I've ever been. So clearly money is not happiness. So why, if we want happiness, why do we keep getting caught up in something that's not happiness? So yeah, instead of seeking out more money, you should be seeking out more happiness. And the way to seek out more happiness is through practicing Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. That's how. And you can do that right here in this moment. No money required. Then Michael asks, what is the best way to relate to non-Buddhists by way of moving them closer to the Dhamma? My answer has been kindness, mine and encouraging theirs. Actually, kindness is often the best way, just to be very kind and gentle and patient. Usually arguing with people is not so helpful. Trying to convince people is not so helpful. If they ask for information about Dhamma, then you can tell them. That's fine. But actively trying to convince other people usually doesn't work terribly well. But people do generally like being the recipients of kindness and generosity and friendliness. And that also tends to encourage them to act in the same way. Gentleness in particular can be incredibly powerful in influencing other people. If you treat people with gentleness, then they tend to become gentler as well. And Nat, hello Nat, good to see you. Nat says, I lost my money the other day. I'm sorry. Why can't I stop thinking about it? Because you're attached to money. That's why you can't stop thinking about it. How to stop thinking about it? Practice samadhi. If you have good samadhi, then you'll learn how to stop thinking about things all the time. So samadhi is incredibly important. Samadhi is one of the ways that we interrupt our thought habits. It's one of the ways that we break our habits, at least temporarily, so that we can start to get some wisdom going instead. So practice samadhi. That helps a lot in terms of stopping yourself from thinking about things. And cultivate happiness through the Buddha's path. Constantly remember your own goodness. So bringing up the happiness that comes through remembering your own sila, your own dana and sila. And recognizing that money is really not that important. As long as you have your absolute basic minimum needs met, everything else is extra. So that's the last question from online. Anything else?
I was wondering about if you could speak to the idea we can't always separate ourselves from people that, for lack of a better word, are fools or foolish. For example, work. When we're working, we might have coworkers. There might be people in families. There might be just people we encounter, and it's hard to get away from those people because of the conditions. So if you had any thoughts about that or advice about that.
Yeah, so when you have situations like that, where you have coworkers or relatives who are fools, which realistically most of them are, then, and you can't really avoid them. Well, one thing is, well, first off, do consider minimizing your contact with them. But when you are around them, then you need to very carefully guard your own mind. Set up a very clear shield in your mind. Like, I'm firmly committed to virtue. I'm firmly committed to goodness. I'm firmly committed to wisdom. And I'm not going to let their foolish behaviors and thought patterns influence me. So have that clear resolution, and really closely watch your thoughts and actions when you're around that person, because you are going to be tempted on a subconscious level. At a minimum, you're going to be tempted to start imitating their behaviors. That's what we do. Humans are like dogs. We like to hang out in packs and imitate each other. So we really need to watch out for that. If we're around people with bad habits, then we need to very carefully watch and guard our own mind. This is another place where samadhi is really helpful. So mindfulness and samadhi, these are critical life skills for getting through actually all manner of difficult situations. But this is one of them where it's quite helpful. So clearly aware of your own mind, clearly aware of the external influence of being around foolish people, and the stability that comes through samadhi practice will help keep you from instinctively following their bad examples. Okay.
And if I could ask, where would you see? It seems like sila would be important too in terms of mindfulness, pulling up that sila. I'm just thinking and working with our being around those people, reminding ourselves of our own sila, as you said.
Yeah. So sila, having this deep, unshakable commitment to sila, and having it very clear in your mind that your sila is not flexible. It is not something which you're willing to change to make other people happy or to get more favorable conditions. But recognizing that your sila is more valuable than any other wealth, than any gain, than any reputation or anything like that. It's better than the positive regard of others. And actually, somebody who thinks better of you when your sila is bad, that's a pretty prime example of a fool. So do you want the good regard of fools, or do you want the good regard of the wise? So the wise praise virtue, and they praise self-restraint, and they praise samadhi. It doesn't matter what the fools praise, because we don't care. We're not trying to impress fools. Okay. And I don't see any other questions from online. So maybe that's it for this morning. So thank you all for joining in, and please continue joining in for our ongoing live stream programs. And we can end the session with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.